Today we're talking about the aging workforce with Dr. Kevin Milligan. He is a professor of economics at the Vancouver School of Economics in the University of British Columbia, scholar in residence with the C.D. Howe Institute, and research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research. He is also an author of a number of papers about the labor market for older workers. A quick political disclaimer. I am a member of the Canadian Future Party, but Dr. Milligan is not, and all of his opinions are his own. And with that, let's begin. Kevin, so thank you again for coming here.
My pleasure to join you.
First question is, as the baby boomers age and the birth rates decline, the labor market for older workers becomes increasingly more important. And I know that you have done quite a bit of research on the topic, as well as around decisions around the retirement. Could you introduce your research and talk through some of the interesting conclusions that you have found?
Sure. So when we think about the challenges in our labor market, we're going from an era where work was scarce to an era over the next few decades where it might be workers that are scarce. And when we look at the available pools of workers, one that's right there in front of us is the senior population, the older Canadians. And there's a couple of interesting things that are leading that pool of workers to be very interesting from a labor market perspective. I guess three that I can think of. The first is that people are living longer. We've seen life expectancy grow tremendously. There was a blip, of course, during COVID, but this is really big growth. We're seeing, just between over the 3 decades between those born in the 1930s to those born in the 1960s, we're seeing about 4 more years of life expectancy. That's quite a bit when you think about average life expectancies already over 80. So we're seeing a big increase in life expectancy, which changes people's perspective on how long they might want to work and how long they might want to live. The second thing is, for those who are still more of traditional working ages, they're healthier than they used to be by a number of different measures. And the flip side of that is actually a lot of the work is more physically light than it used to be. People working on laptops rather than with their hands is more prevalent. And that just allows people to continue to work. And even those who do work with their hands, there's different phases of life. We've all been to Home Depot and we see these extremely skilled and knowledgeable people who are helping out, picking out the right screws and hammers to buy. That's something that a lot of people who have a lot of skills and talent are doing at the later end of their life. And that's a company that's really been digging into that. The third factor is the role of women in the workplace. And what we saw is the cohort of women who came of working age in the 1970s is now arriving at retirement ages, and versus previous cohorts of women who might have been, didn't have as much attachment to the workplace, might have been a bit happier to stay home and do care for their parents or do more things around the home. The cohorts of women hitting their 60s now are much more likely to have a career behind them and be able to contribute a lot more to the labor market. And so you see all these factors combining to seeing there's actually been an increase in work among those in their 60s over the past 30 years now. The big turnaround happened around 1995. We started to see retirement ages actually start going back up. Sometimes people look at that as a bad news story. It's like, oh no, we have to slave away at work a whole lot more. But no one's forcing this to happen. This is a choice people are making because they see they might be living a bit longer. They see they're healthier. They see they're able to pad their retirement savings a bit more. So I see this as a good outcome.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess at the same time, it's probably important to make sure that the retirement policies or the supplements do not discourage people from continuing to work if they want to.
Yeah, that's another part of my research. I should say most of this research has been conducted with Tammy Sherrill from Wilfrid Laurier University, so give full credit to my co-author. We've also looked at the incentive in pension programs and how that affects people's retirement decisions. So just saying that people are, women have better labor force attachment through their career. People are living longer. People are healthier. These are all things pushing people to be able and want to work more in their 60s. Pushing against that might be incentives that are embedded inside people's retirement plans. So if you have a retirement plan that only counts a certain number of years of contribution or years of contribution plus age, there's various ways these things can work. It can turn out that if you continue working, you're essentially just throwing money away after certain cutoff ages or certain cutoff thresholds. And so that's something that can push people to stop working before they might actually want to stop working. What Tim and I have looked at is specifically the incentives inside Canada's public pension plans. Where the incentives are most important is in the Canada pension plan, where there's a pivot point at age 65, where if you retire before age 65, you get your pension reduced. And if you retire after age 65, you get your pension increase. So 65 is like the neutral age, and before and after that, there's an adjustment because, if you were taken at age 60, you're going to get the pension for more years than if you took it at age 65. So there's an adjustment such that on balance, it should be about the same for an average person. So the important thing, though, is if you're sitting there at age 60 and think, should I retire now, age 61, if you wait a year, you kind of get a bonus by waiting a year because the actuarial adjustment on that pension is smaller as you hit age 65. You make it all the way to 65, you're neutral. And after that, you actually get a positive bonus to your pension, your Canada pension plan to keep working. So that's one incentive in there. We find that they changed these actuarial incentives starting in 2011. And we find that it does have an impact that people, when these actuarial incentives are made more generous, that it did have an impact on people working longer. The other thing that matters, though, is how that program interacts with another program. So we have another elderly support program called the Guaranteed Income Supplement that is for about the bottom 1/3 of elderly, and that just provides a top up to their income if they happen to be in the lower income range. Well, the challenge is if you're in the Canada pension plan and you're getting that extra bonus for working a bit longer, the guaranteed income supplement comes along and says, well, you don't need as much of a top up if you're getting that bonus. And you stack these two things together, and it means that for a lot of lower income workers, it actually, they face a very high kind of tax rate on their extra work. And so that's one of the things that pushes lower income workers to actually retire quite a bit earlier than higher income workers.
Yeah, that's interesting. Reading that paper specifically, it looked like the math is very different for lower income worker versus somebody who is a high earner.
Yeah, the incentives are quite different. It's mostly because of people who are in this range where you get the guaranteed income supplement. That's a program that has very successfully raised a lot of seniors out of very low income situations. So it's a program that has a lot of positives to it. So I'm not here to suggest we shouldn't have this program at all.
For sure.
What's interesting, though, is that we need to be attentive to the fact that this program has this interaction with the Canada Pension Plan. And as we design changes to these programs, we want to be attentive to that kind of interaction and make sure that we don't shortchange the low-income workers by essentially pushing them into retirement before they'd like to. And so that they're able to, keep both their CPP and their GIS to the extent that we are able to do that is one way to go. So this was, I remember when we first started working on this, 15 years ago now, I was at a meeting with the chief actuary from the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, which is a big, long acronym for an Ottawa office that is a regulator for pension plans, and is also consulted by the Canada Pension Plan as they set these parameters of how to adjust pensions based on your age. And this is actually, he saw us present our paper and he asked for a copy of the paper because they do very careful calculations of what the adjustment ought to be based on ages, but they didn't account for things like these interactions that matter for like 1/3, 40% of Canadians. And so there is some attention to this as we design these programs. And back in 2016 when the Canada Pension Plan was being revised and expanded, which I was a big supporter of doing that. But I thought the expansion ought to be attentive again to making sure that we don't make worse the incentives to retire early as we expand the Canada Pension Plan. So I think these are things that we want to be aware of as we design policy. Because people care a lot about their pensions, especially when they get older and closer to retirement ages. We want to make sure that we balance off the need for retirement income security with the economy's need and individual Canadians' need to have a secure time in the workplace so that they can build up their savings for retirement on their own.
I'm curious, have you looked at the differences between the industries? Because I assume the picture would look quite different for office workers versus, let's say, somebody who does harder manual labor.
Yeah, there's certainly in the paper that we wrote, we didn't have great data on industry, but we were part of an international project, so I can draw a bit on other teams that were able to, categorize workers into blue collar versus white collar, or these kind of categorizations. And you certainly do see that trend. We can cut the data by education, which may be correlated with that. And we find the same kind of thing, that there's big differences in patterns, lower education versus higher education workers. We can also look at the earnings you've had over your career, look at low earnings versus high earnings workers, which again is a slightly different thing, because you can earn quite nicely as a blue collar worker, and you can be
sure.
a lower paid white collar worker. So these aren't perfect distinctions, but we see these patterns that are there, that office workers, lower income workers, lower education workers have very different patterns in when they retire and how they retire. And how they retire is an important part of it. A really big part of people's retirement decision is whether or not they have a workplace pension plan. So people in the public sector often have a workplace pension plan. Many private sector employers will have matching RSP plans, things like that. Some of them, the bigger unionized shops, will still have big old defined benefit plans that you'll see out there in some of the more mature industries. But these are all things that matter for people's retirement decisions, especially for younger cohorts, where if you're working in a younger firm, it's more likely that you're going to have some kind of matched RSP program kind of thing. And we want to make sure that we design the tax parts of that such that people are mobile, able to move around to a job that works for them without losing their pension. This was an important part of the motivation when the Canada Pension Plan was put in place in the 1960s. One of the key elements for it was having a pension that you could carry with you from workplace to workplace. We didn't want you to be locked in. We see that in the United States with healthcare insurance, where people feel locked into a certain job because if they move jobs, something like a pre-existing condition could be treated differently. I mean, there's been some protections against that in the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, but this kind of job lock-in that can happen with health insurance in the US is certainly something that can happen with pension plans as well. So you see someone, back before the Canada Pension Plan, who might work very hard for their whole life, but across 4 or 5 different employers, and never amass enough pension in any one of those employers to have a nice, comfortable retirement. And so that was one of the main benefits of the Canada Pension Plan, is you had this portable pension. This portability word was a key element in the debates in the 1960s, and is coming up again now as we think about Alberta investigating whether they ought to go a separate way. One of the main reasons I'm against that is I really think that the labor market flexibility of having as unified as we can a pension system across Canada really helps out labor mobility. It's been a huge benefit to Alberta, for example, because as you know, if you go to Alberta, you'll find lots of people from other places in Canada who've moved there. They're willing to move there because of this continuity of their benefits and continuity of their life. It's still Canada. It's still the Canada Pension Plan. And if you have this really segmented social security system, then it gets harder for those Alberta companies to hire people from Newfoundland or PEI or wherever who want to have that mobility across Canada. So that's a way that a well-designed social safety net can actually enhance the economy by providing a platform for people to be mobile around the country.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting way to think about it. Yeah, that totally makes sense, because I have seen this myself as well with some of the workplace pension plans where they are pretty hard to carry over sometimes or merge together. And it becomes quite annoying, actually, where you start to appreciate a lot more one single central pension plan.
Yeah, I mean, I have a family member. I was working over some of the pension details with her as well. And she's been to a few different employers with a couple of different pension plans. And as we looked at the exact nature of the pension plan, it made sense for her to actually go back to the first employer for the last few years of her career simply to juice up that pension. It made hundreds of thousands of dollars of difference to her eventual payout. But that's kind of a crazy thing, right? You want a system where people will go where their talents match best the needs of an employer and not be forced into some crazy going back to where you used to work because of pension reasons. And again, we see that in the US with the lock-in that happens with health insurance. The more that we can avoid that, the better.
So stepping back in slightly bigger picture, um, as we are facing sort of increasing labor shortages, how much of a contribution do you think people retiring later can make here?
I think that's a good way of framing the question. I haven't done those calculations directly, but what I can say is that the cohorts who are hitting retirement ages now are really large. If you take, let's say we're in 2025 now, we're close enough. If you take 65 off of that, you are looking at the 1960 birth cohort, which is actually getting closer to the end of the baby boom. But we have a lot of people in their 60s right now. It's like a huge burst of people going through their 60s. They'll soon hit their 70s and 80s, and we see much less work among people in their 70s and 80s. But it's that people in their 60s where there's a lot of flexibility and potentially working a few more years. So it's a big pool of potential labor. It's experienced labor. It's labor that is already going to be there from language and going to be there on training and everything else. It seems a shame not to draw on that pool. Squeezing a couple extra years out of that pool of labor makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure it's a long run solution, though, where we're going to need workers in the healthcare sector and other touch intensive sectors and human interaction intensive sectors. In those sectors, we're going to need a lot of labor, and I'm not sure how much an extra couple years of work will matter for that, but that's a good calculation to think about. I don't think that we can imagine that completely filling in for the drop in birth rates and also completely replacing, to extent someone wanted to, immigration as a source of extra labor as well. So I don't know that it's going to be completely replacing it, but it was certainly having some more work out of that pool would be helpful in terms of keeping our labor force strong and healthy.
So what do you think are the lessons for the policymakers in general as a whole going forward?
I think a big lesson in my study of this is just the importance of long-term thinking, which is really hard in a populist era that we're in now, where people really seem to want action now on things. And why a long-term focus is important is a lot of these changes take a long time to manifest. The Canada Pension Plan, which is agreed upon by, I think at the end, every premier, every province, and the federal government. So a lot of consensus across parties on that. It's phased in. That expansion of the Canada Pension Plan was agreed upon in 2016, started to be phased in 2019, and is getting close to fully phased in by 2025. So by the time I hit those ages in another decade or so, I'll be getting a small portion from this expanded Canada Pension Plan. But my kids who are entering the workforce soon will live their whole lives under this new expansion. And so when you look at those projections of like how much more you might get and how much bigger it is, it's a generational thing. So the premiers and the federal government got together, made a generational change in 2016. And that's the kind of long run thinking you need to get something done. Again, on the Canada Pension Plan, back in the 90s, when the contribution rates, the payroll taxes were too small relative to the needs going forward, we increased those payroll taxes a lot, and we saved it up in the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. Now we have, I haven't seen the recent numbers, but something like $500 billion saved up. It's a tremendous amount. They've done a tremendous job on the returns, averaging something like 10% a year over the past 15 years. So that was something that was done in the 90s. It was controversial, But over the long run, there's few countries that would want to that we want to trade spots with. This was a really good choice to kind of tax the baby boomers a bit more during their prime years, such that we can pay for the baby boomers' pensions out of the CPP. Me not being a boomer, I kind of like that. I'm a Gen Xer, and I think the baby boomers have done fine. I don't want to pay extra taxes to pay for their pension. And because of those choices that were made in the 1990s, so 30 years ago, the CPP, they kind of funded their own CPP to a large extent. That's the kind of long run thinking that is needed for that. One final example is coming forward. I mentioned the baby boomers we're just getting close to the end of them hitting age 65, but that wave of baby boomers is now getting close to 75, and another 10 years will be getting close to age 85. And what you see at age 75 is when healthcare costs start to go up a lot, and age 85 is where long-term care and home care costs start to go up a lot, and they go up. When we think about the number of people over age 85 in Canada, by the year 2040, it will more than double. That's only 15 years away. 15 years maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a lot. It's not a long time, actually, when you think of having a labor force strategy to staff long-term care homes, having a construction program to build long-term care homes. This requires long-run planning. It's now getting close that, like, within a 5-year election cycle window of provincial or federal government, they're going to see that the upswing in those long-term care needs happening within the term of governments that are elected now. I don't see anyone talking about it for real anyway. This is going to be something, coming out of the pandemic, people talked about a long-term care crisis and that we weren't well staffed and well organized during the pandemic, specifically in long-term care homes. Well, just take whatever problem we're having now in terms of staffing, in terms of beds, and double it in the next 10, 15 years. And that's going to be a big challenge. We should start working on it now. We should demand of our provincial governments and our federal government to start coming up with a plan now and implementing that plan fairly soon, or else we're going to be stuck with a really large problem within a short enough horizon of a decade.
So I think we're coming up on time. Any final thoughts?
When I talk about longevity and mortality and pensions, often it comes across as a bit of a negative thing. Like some economists is forcing you to work longer, talking about long-term care homes, which aren't always thought about as pleasant places. But I do want to emphasize the positive aspects of this. That we're living longer is a great bounty. We have more years with our grandchildren, more years with our loved ones. This is a tremendous thing. When we see life expectancies going up by 4 or 5 years over the past generation, like, people think about a birthday with your grandmother and how special that is. Having 5 more of those is a fantastic thing. So we should all be happy that this is happening. When we think about the work aspect of it, again, this is not about anyone forcing anyone to work. This is someone who knows that they're going to be living a bit longer and a bit healthier, making sure they have options in front of them. If they want to retire early, that's fine. If they want to work a bit more to bolster their retirement savings, that's fine as well. We should think about these things as opportunities, and it's a very positive thing. We want to be happy about it and not get buried too deep into the actuarial life tables and the economist calculations, and just start from a place where this is a great success of our society, that we've been able to expand life expectancy, and we're dealing with some of the challenges that arise from it. But the first cut ought to be, this is a great thing.
Thank you very much. And that was it. Hey, if you want to see more interviews like this, click the like and subscribe buttons. And if you're in Canada, check out the Canadian Future Party. See you next time.